Today, Susan and I are going to demonstrate how it is you might go about doing a rhetorical analysis of a visual text. And the text in question that we're going to talk about is this postcard, which we're going to let you look at in a little more detail. So what we're trying to do in this video is not necessarily give you a formula or a recipe to follow in order to conduct a rhetorical analysis, but basically to just ask questions and to kind of talk through how it is we think about encountering a text and how we make sense of it. And I think one of the first places to start is with a description, a dense description of the piece in question, picking out the constituent parts, all the individual elements that come together to create a cohesive whole. So let's start there, Susan.
Sounds good. And Ben's talking about more than just a glance. What we aim for when we're doing a rhetorical analysis is what we think of as close looking or even slow looking, where you actually spend time and pay attention to details that you don't notice when you first look at it, and start noticing relationships between the elements of the particular image. Things that are not obvious at a first glance. So this is a standard postcard. It's 4 inches by 6 inches, which is about 10 by 15 centimeters. It's printed in color on both sides. It has color on both sides. There's an image and some text, a small amount of text on the front. And if we look at the back, we see that, as with most postcards, there's more alphabetic text on the back. And that text appears on the left-hand side, and the right-hand side remains open for an address or a stamp. So let's start with the image on the front. It's made up of 10 faces and 2 rows of 5. Most of the people pictured are young. All of them are looking straight at the camera, and in that sense seem also to be looking straight at you. And the expressions on their faces are all relatively serious. There's a slight smile on a couple of faces, but they're relatively serious. Now these are all similarities. These are things that the images have in common. But we can also find some rather significant differences in this image. One of them is that there are 7 men and 3 women pictured, so there's not a balance there. 4 of the images, 3 men and 1 woman, have been rendered in black and white. And even more significantly, over those black and white faces are large red X's.
That's the first thing I notice when I look at this, is the impact of those X's.
Right. It is the first thing you see, and you have to take that time in order to see what it is that those X's are covering up. And the other thing that's on the front of this postcard is just a small caption at the bottom that says 4 out of 10 age deaths are related to drug abuse. It's a plain font with the word AIDS picked out in red. Again, it has that emphasis that we feel with the red X's. So let's look at the back and do a brief description of it.
So when we do turn to the back, we notice that it has a lot more text. That red color motif is being replaced by blue. It's a little cooler color. And we get text that basically expands our sense of the purpose and the context for this postcard. And again, I'll let you read this. So based on the text on the back, one thing we get a sense of is the kind of exigence, which is a rhetorical term, kind of related to kairos, the occasion, the social conditions that kind of gave rise to the creation of a text like this. We get a sense that in the early 2000s, AIDS-related deaths were a problem, and that something needed to be done to raise awareness about the behavior that led to the contraction of this disease. And so here we have a number of stats. 41% of Americans who died of AIDS in 2003 could trace their HIV to drug abuse or sex with a drug abuser. And then a follow-up that goes into detail about what you should do as the person reading this. So if you're not worrying about contracting HIV from injecting drugs or having sex with an injection drug abuser, you should be. You could be next. So that gives us a sense of the context in which this piece originally existed.
And of course that brings us to audience, because that particular context creates a very specific audience for this message. This was from 2003. As Ben mentioned, the HIV was prevalent, there were many AIDS-related deaths, and we really didn't have a solution to the problem on the horizon. So one way in which we can think about audience with this piece, looking at the front of it, is that because we tend to look for things that are about us in images like this, people who are of the ages of the people pictured here are probably the audience. Young adults. So someone who sees that is going to identify with the particular people in this picture. And that's pretty international too, because the faces here run the gamut in terms of ethnicity. And so that broadens out an audience for this message to people from many nations.
Right, and then again on the back, the use of the word "you," that direct address is kind of interesting too. It's not just some disembodied message. It's actually addressed to the person picking up this postcard and looking at these faces on the front of it.
Which brings us back to what you said about the problem. A public service announcement is designed to solve a problem, and this pulls people like this into this message, who may realize that they actually have to do something about this. They have to be part of this, and they have to be part of it now.
Right. One thing before we move on, the use of black and white and the use of the red X's, I think, is worth kind of lingering on a little bit. In part because when I look at this, I interpret this to mean these people have died because there are 4 of them. The text at the bottom refers to 4 out of 10 AIDS deaths, but it's not explicitly stated. You know, there's something about these figures being cast in black and white and the X's being over them that I am meant to interpret as these people being deceased.
Right. Slightly ambiguous, but really not. It only takes a few minutes, I think, to go from just looking at it to wondering about what the X's and the black and white are about, and then drawing that conclusion, which is a characteristic of a good PSA, that it's not unclear, that it's a very straightforward single message, and not necessarily really easy, but pretty available to understand.
Another thing we can talk about in conjunction with analyzing a text such as this is some of the terminology we picked up over the past several weeks in this course. For example, the rhetorical appeals. Why don't we talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. In our introduction to PSAs, we mentioned that pathos is actually probably the most predominant appeal in a public service announcement. And this is not necessarily the case in other genres of text. In an academic piece of writing, for example, often logos is right up there at the top. You want to be presenting, kind of hard evidence to stand in for your case. But pathos is necessary as the primary appeal in PSAs for the reasons that we've talked about with regard to audience. We need to pull people in and to connect with them emotionally. So perhaps an emotion that this would first generate would just be
I don't know, a sense of compassion.
I was thinking, first of all, they might be just wondering, what's this about? So you go from kind of wondering to compassion when you realize the message, then perhaps to fear So there are a number of different steps and a number of different emotions that this could elicit. However, that doesn't mean that you can create a PSA that's all emotion. Partly that limits your audience because there are people who want to see different kinds of evidence. And there are absolutely people who need to understand the ethos of this particular message. Do you want to talk about ethos for a minute?
Yeah, and I think you're right to point out the fact that, you know, your interpretation evolves the more time you spend with the text, the more time you linger on it. And you're right that this is the front, that is the most predominant piece, and it does focus on pathos. But as we turn the text over, we see some indications of how ethos functions in a text like this. One big question I would have is who is speaking, right? Who is creating this text? And we get clues, or not really clues, we get actual indications of that on the back. The logo of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is part of the National Institute of Health, a government organized health entity, is giving us these statistics, is giving us URLs for more information about it. So to some extent that kind of addresses the authority or the character of the speaker behind this designed piece.
However, there is logos here too. We find it on the front of the postcard where it says 4 out of 10 U.S. AIDS deaths are related to drug abuse. It's a specific, fact that we can hang our interpretation on and our willingness to act. It repeats that information and makes it very specific to the year 2003 on the back. So there is a nice balanced combination here of logos, ethos, and pathos that makes this particular PSA postcard pretty effective.